Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And tonight we have Fran Bollin joining us. She's the executive director of AFOI, which is Assisting Families of Inmates, which was founded in 1978 in Richmond, Virginia, for the purpose of transporting family members to visit incarcerated members of their family in 15 different prisons around the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you so much, Fran, for being with us tonight. I know that this is probably a nonprofit that most people have never heard of.
Yes, we do hear that often. And so we're so very grateful for opportunities like this to make the public aware of our programs and services.
So in 1978, this was started by Thomas Edmund, I believe,
Yep.
Edmonds, and he was with the Second Presbyterian Church in Richmond, and he actually sort of started this as an interfaith effort to get volunteers and with cars to transport family members to visit families sometimes who are 4 hours away in prisons that are in remote rural areas of Virginia. And again, a lot of people are not deeply rooted in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but we've been around for 400 years and we've been incarcerating people for pretty much all of those 400 years. And as the prison industrial complex expanded, rural areas took on prisons. The land was cheaper. It's considered a job creator in rural parts. So densely populated areas like Richmond or Northern Virginia or Norfolk frequently have family members who are all the way across on the other side of the state. And this causes a lot of problems as far as keeping families together and also preparing people who are incarcerated for reentry into the community once they've served their time. So I want to go back. You don't have to recap the entire history, but you've been there for almost half of it, Fran. You've been there for
Yes.
like 20 years. And so I do want you to help our viewers understand the mission of this organization, why it continues on after 43 years, and as executive director, what you're hoping to see happen.
Um, as you said, Tom started the program in 1978. He had volunteered for a similar program in Florida. And when he moved back to Virginia to serve as the dean of the law school at U of R, he rejoined Second Presbyterian Church. And this is where we're still housed today. I'm in our office. And garnered the area support of the Downtown Cooperative Ministries. So congregational members would use their personal vehicles to take family members out for visitation. Another congregation, while those groups were out, would come in and fix a hot meal. And so when all got back, visitors and volunteers, it was a good time for fellowship. Prison visiting is both a physically and emotionally exhausting experience for families and children. And the last thing we want anyone to have to do is to go home and worry about dinner. So that's still part of our service today. We have dedicated community members and church groups that come in and provide the meals for us today. We expanded on from personal vehicles to rental vans with volunteer drivers. And today we have contracts with several charter providers, the primary one of those being James River Transportation. And we reach the potential for 26 of the 40 facility stops that can be done in a one-day trip from Richmond, so that families come in the morning and board and then are back in the evening. The furthest one of those is River North. That travels twice a year. Families have to be here to get on the bus at 4 a.m. and they get back about 7:30 in the evening. So that is a long day to travel for visitation. And so we just recognize how important keeping these connections are. And this is shown and evidenced everywhere. The stress level in the homes is better for the families outside to be able to know that their loved one is okay. Offender behavior has been shown to be better with consistent supportive visits. And of course, our recidivism rates and what we're talking about, public safety, also sees a great impact when these things are successful.
And in looking at your website, and I do encourage people to go to your website, afoi.org, because it is full of so much information. For anyone of our viewers who's never had someone incarcerated or visited someone who's incarcerated, it's not a simple process. There's forms that you fill out and applications that you make to get approved for a visit. Then there's an intake form that you do. There's support services for families, including children, and there's a lot of emphasis that AFOI is putting on keeping children connected to family members who are incarcerated and supporting them in other ways as well. Because after 43 years of providing this service, clearly we're talking about intergenerational cycles of trauma where it's, families are affected, not just one generation or one person in a generation, but the trauma of this isolation and separation ends up falling on the children. So talk to us a little bit about, your focus on children and the services that you're trying to provide to stop this intergenerational trauma of incarceration that has been inflicted on so many families.
Mm-hmm. We have a program called our Milk and Cookies Children's Program. We affectionately refer to it as MAC, and it started in 1999 in Blackwell, which is in the south side of the city of Richmond. A needs assessment had been conducted, and it was believed at that time that 7 out of children in those communities were experiencing familial incarceration, not necessarily a parent, but a close member of their family. And so we launched the program. It was based on the only longitudinal study of children with incarcerated parents at that time, which was Project Seek, services to enable and empower kids out of Flint, Michigan. The program coordinator at that time went and observed the Seek program in process, came back, and this was about 2 years prior to my joining, launched a program in Blackwell Elementary School. And when I arrived, we were with the program in 2 schools, and the enrollment was not really supporting those figures. And so we were getting referrals in from the schools, psychologists, social workers, administration, but it's not something that's asked on the enrollment form. Why? As a reason of separation from parents. And it's not even asked until you get into the IEP process for a special education situation. So there's things there. So what we did instead was send a flyer home with every child at the school, and our enrollment doubled. And then we found that we're identifying these children that are in the situation that the school wasn't even aware of. And so it was a big learning experience for all of us, and enabled us to grow that program for quite some time and really focus on the curriculum and what we're addressing. And it's unique because it happens in the school day during the child's non-academic period, their humanities period, and we alter that each week so that they're not missing music or art, which are extremely important, the same one each week. And the boys get mad if they miss PE. So,
Yeah.
so we don't want to interrupt that kind of thing. But we're pulling them by grade level if they've been identified and their parent or caregiver would like for them to be in the group. And we run a curriculum over 18 weeks throughout the school year. The first 9 weeks are our own established curriculum that really, for the population that we're working with, are based on Kwanzaa. And so they're really culturally sound. Principles, but they're also really a lot to do with community, and so can be translated elsewhere. And then the follow-up spring 9 sessions are 3 weeks of self-esteem, 3 weeks of anger management and conflict resolution, and we always end on grief and loss. And some of that is going into the summer, and I know my staff may be different because we utilize graduate students in the School of Social Work at VCU to employ this program in the schools. And I also know that, our families can be transient, and those children might not be at the same school the following year. The ultimate goals of the program are to work holistically with the families, whereas our video visitation and transportation, those services are geared right now towards state facilities in the Department of Corrections. Within the MAC program, we serve children in those schools who may have a parent in a local or regional jail, a state facility, a federal facility, and we've even had children whose parents were in an ICE detention center awaiting deportation. So we'll serve any child in this situation. We will follow the family 12 months post release if the parent happens to come home during the time that we're working with the child. But a lot of it is around feelings identification, knowing what my emotions are and how to deal with them, the threat of parental incarceration and discussions about connecting with those people and communicating with them, and writing your parents' letters. Is part of the curriculum. And we've been fortunate enough to have several program evaluations recently with William and Mary and Dr. Danielle Dallaire. And, they're showing that the measures that we're hoping to achieve, we're on our way to. So we're very excited for this to move from an emerging practice to one that's evidence-based. And I think, the greatest gains that have been shown so far are in their emotional and social competence. And the greatest decreases have been in their emotional dysregulation. So really being able to get a hold of my feelings and understand what they are, and how to cope with them. Coping and resiliency is key in all over this.
It is. And, and I've just had an aha moment in hearing you talk about this. In education, there's a lot more discussion about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There's also more discussion over trauma-informed educational practices. And I would say that's fairly new, at least in my experience, and I'm not an educator. But the fact that the IEP process, and my son had an IEP, does not even ask questions like this is like, oh, wow, aha, like, is there something that in a broader sense, considering that mass incarceration is a problem everywhere in this country, mass incarceration is a problem in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that the schools are not in any way screening to ask how many children might be affected by this situation. I'm both, it's a surprise and it's not a surprise, but what is the way forward from the educational perspective?
Well, I will say, because I have children with IEPs also, that is finally where it appeared, and I was paying attention. And I'm not in the city of Richmond, and this was some time ago, but we had spoken with them about it being on the registration cards. There are different reasons that are listed, and to be able to know that, because then we have a unique set of needs.
Right.
Up front would be a really good thing. The status of it, I've not checked in a while, but at that time I was surprised. And then going through the IEPs with my boys, it popped up finally in there.
Well, it's something that you need to know. I mean, obviously, what happens at home, teachers can't solve every problem in the classroom, but being aware that a child is struggling, has experienced trauma in a way that maybe has not been identified, only helps to give the child those support services. And I'm really, interested in the fact that, do you find that the children in these programs benefit from just being aware that they're not the only child with a family member who's incarcerated? I mean, is it a comfort for them to realize they are not the only one, or that it's a stigma, or they can't talk about it, or they shouldn't tell people?
Yes, there's so much of that. The peer-to-peer and the realizing that I'm not alone is why we believe so much in this group support model. And of course, if someone shows extra needs, we will address those on an individual basis. But we really believe in that concept. They come in and they know, that there are others in the same situation, doing the same things we were, and experiencing the same feelings. We were involved for a long time with the All God's Children Summer Camp, which really began for children of incarcerated mothers, because there are different impacts there, and seeing the relational understanding that those kids had when they came together, just proved I'm so much more willing to at least accept what I'm hearing. I'm so much more willing to participate potentially, and really take some of this in and grow, because it's happening to other people my age.
I think, human beings need community. and you need to find your own community. And sometimes that's hard if you're in a situation where you think you're not supposed to talk about it. And I think families who've experienced incarceration of their family members sort of feel like, maybe it's something you don't want your children to talk about. Maybe they feel that too, that we don't talk about it. So I want to just pivot a little bit to talk about your video visitation program, both when that started, like, the technology isn't 48 years old. So when that started, and I want our viewers to understand that the isolation that all of us felt this year, when we couldn't, like, I didn't see my daughter for an entire year, and grandparents couldn't see their grandchildren, and couples where one was in an assisted living or nursing facility, and somebody they'd been married to for 60 years was stuck at home. So all of us in the past year got used to relying on tools like Zoom and FaceTime and all of these things that made us in some way feel connected. However, Christmas morning, Christmas Day was about all of us being online and so that we felt connected in some way. And so for a whole year of pretty much everybody in America having to do that at some level, I'm hoping our viewers really understand what it's like when you explain what a lift it's been to try to get video visitation implemented so that people incarcerated and their families at home don't experience that kind of isolation year after year after year after year.
With prison overcrowding in Virginia in the 90s, a number of male inmates were moved to Beaumont Detention Center in Texas. And while they were there, the organization, then known as Prison Family Support Services, provided several bus trips, but also the first successful video visit from here at Second Presbyterian Church. Fast forward several years and technology is improving. The board and I discussed it. I went back to the Department of Corrections and spoke with them. And at that time, they were in a pilot with another church here in Richmond and Wallens Ridge. And they said, just hold tight. Let's see if this pilot has good results. And of course it did. That's a very difficult facility to reach. And especially it's quite a distance from Richmond. So, after that was proven, they came back and brought us both in partnership and launched what is the visitor center model. And that is responding to the barrier of distance and lack of technology and things like that for families within the community. So we started with the church centers. Richmond, here at our office, is our Richmond site. And then we paid attention, obviously, to the Crescent in Virginia, where folks come from. And so Norfolk was next, and then Northern Virginia. So we've got Alexandria, Norfolk, Fredericksburg, Roanoke, Petersburg, and Richmond right now. And families can go in their community and be able to do as we're doing right now. And for some folks, and I'll share with you the very first video that I turned on here in Richmond, with fingers crossed that all technology would work, was with somebody who was incarcerated in Red Onion. And for the visitors represented in the room that day, they were a spouse and a child and a grandchild and a sibling. And they had not laid eyes on this person and him on them in 8 years. And, that's something that is just really difficult to think about. And babies had been born and people had graduated and people had passed away, major milestone life events where you need your family. And to be able to conquer that isolation, as soon as he popped on, we all were crying. I mean, it was just, and as soon as then everyone got themselves together, it was a family visiting. It was a family catching up, and just so grateful to be able to see each other's faces. And really, that's the simplicity in what, our goal is here, is to connect them.
Keep people connected.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm hoping that people understand this in a way they've never understood it before, that, your family is the center of our universe. And even when someone's incarcerated, for whatever reason they're incarcerated, to be isolated away from a family unit that you hope to rejoin. And this becomes an important part of this too. And this is about successful reentry. And the key components that programs will tell you are integral to a successful reentry and impacts recidivism. And recidivism being when people return to jail or prison after they've served time for a first infraction. So talk a little bit about what your experience has been as you have moved forward year after year and the program has grown and you've got new visitation centers and more families can take advantage of this. You know, how have you seen that impact reentry?
Well, the centers and such were established in around 2010. And so that, now we're a decade down the road. And about 4 years ago, started talking with the Department of Corrections. We know that there's this remote to home capability. This technology can be pushed into people's homes, just like we Skype or FaceTime are doing now. And so if, we talked with several technical partners and signed a contract with Global Tel Link. And from January of 2019 to December of 2019, we outfitted all 40 major correctional facilities in the state, and infrastructure that had not been there and technology circuitry that had not been there. None of us knowing or have any clue that in March of 2020, the pandemic would happen. But yeah, it's grown immensely before the pandemic. So as it started, we were at about 3,000 visits per month. And I think this month we're set to do about 15,000 visits per month. So this has been the critical, lifeline for families and friends during this time.
But no such thing as a free lunch.
No.
So there's none of this is free. You make it sound like it's so easy and we went from 3,000 to 15,000. Well, I'm sure there was a price tag attached to, 5 times over increasing the number of visitations you're able to do. Explain a little bit about why Global Tel Link has a proprietary sort of contract with the Department of Corrections. Obviously, Zoom, there's just a lot of reason you can't use widely available, unsecured, open platforms. But this does increase, it creates a barrier to participation.
Well, the contract with GTL is with AFOI,
Okay.
and so if we were to choose another provider when our contract was up, and that is because I am able to work with DOC in a way. These kinds of services belong in a nonprofit space. I'm able to bring things to DOC at no cost, essentially. And that's different funding. Those are grants. Those are things that we're able to provide. So what I essentially needed to do was find a technical partner that was going to be able to upfront all of this and get it in. As a small nonprofit, that's not something we're able to do. Now, what we can do is work within the system to make sure that there are family friendly policies and that the securities around it and things like that, have families in mind in making this connection. GTL and Securus and the other correctional grade visitation platforms screen. They're able to monitor and record. The recording storage is probably one of the most costly pieces, along with the circuitry for this. So, I know since the pandemic started that there were several states that employed Zoom in a stopgap measure because they did not already have something in place. But I would not think that would be a permanent and ongoing solution. I also know that Virginia, just by whatever measure of grace we got things in December of 2019, that we're ahead of the game. There are still states today that don't have any video visitation, which literally means that their families have not seen them.
So with Global Tel Link, when you say you outfitted 40 correctional facilities, Global Tel Link is the one who actually put the capabilities in those facilities?
Yes.
Wow. So that would be a pretty heavy lift.
Yes.
So then, so as far as the expense, the ongoing expense then, is that driven by usage then, or is it by the minute?
Well, it's somewhat of both. So when we were doing our visitor center model, the state wanted us to standardize with the pilot program that had already been in place with Wallens Ridge. So it was 50 cents a minute. And whenever I talk about our any fee for services that AFOI has, it's not the barrier to people visiting. It's $12 for an adult to ride our bus. If you don't have $12, you're still getting on the bus. That's not why we're here. And so the same thing goes across our other programs. But it was 50 cents a minute. And in vetting and working with Global Telelink, we were immediately able to lower that to 40 cents a minute. So that's a big savings to families. An ongoing goal is to continue lowering that cost to families. Usage will continue to drive that, as well as further expansion and stability as we look at other options for parts of it that are really costly, like the circuitry.
Right. And so the visitation center model is not going away simply because not everybody has a device at home. And there are places too. We've heard a lot about broadband access around the Commonwealth of Virginia. I know legislation was passed this year, identifying this in the year after the pandemic, that not having access to even get onto the internet impeded people all over the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so your visitation model, definitely allows people to come to a place where they know they can connect if they don't have the ability to do that personally. Mm-hmm. We have to go to a break, but when we come back from our break, I do want you to talk a little bit about these visitation centers and whether you intend to expand them to even further locations, and also to talk about the other detention centers like your juvenile justice centers. Mm-hmm. You kind of mentioned in passing that for the kids locally in Richmond, they could visit incarcerated family members' parents who are in a local jail. So I want you to help. So after our break, I want you to help us to understand all the different kinds of facilities that there are in Virginia, because honestly, if you quizzed me right now, I would not be able to identify them for you. I wouldn't. When you said that 40 correctional facilities, I'm like, please don't ask me to name them because I wouldn't have a clue or to tell you where they are even on a map. And I will tell you that one of the great things about your website is the map. So if you go to afoi.org, you will find a map and you will find their locations, and the map will tell you exactly what that location is. But we're going to a break.
Awesome. Thank you.
We're going to a break. This is Inside Scoop. I'm Catherine Reed. You're listening with Fran Bollin. So join us after the break.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Let me tell you about the toughest guy on earth. He does the work of 2 jobs, but only gets paid for one. He's tough enough to feed the man that gave him a lifetime of nourishment. He has the crazy strength to lift the man that raised him up without even flinching. That's right, no employee of the month bonus check here. This guy, this warrior, will always be by his father's side, even if his dad will hardly remember. Good luck finding a gym to train for that. If this guy isn't the toughest guy on the planet, then I don't know who is. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public, stay 6 feet or more from others, follow state and local guidelines, and wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Fran Bollin. She is the Executive Director of AFOI, which is Assisting Families of Inmates. It's a small nonprofit based in Richmond. It's been around for 43 years, and their mission is to connect families with their loved ones who are incarcerated. So Fran, when we went to our break, we were talking of many things, but one of the things that I want to circle back around to is that we've talked about video visitation and we've talked about in-person visitation. You know, how has COVID-19 affected your ability as far as in-person visitations to the facilities, but also just at the visitation centers? I mean, what does the world look like right now?
Well, in-person visitation with both the Department of Corrections and the Department of Juvenile Justice was suspended in March of 2020. So all of our transportation services have been suspended since that time. Our visitor centers in the community were also closed for a time and started opening up right around the holidays. And we've got Petersburg yet to still bring back online. So that has been slowly because those are volunteer sites and they need to, and we be ready and willing to open and to host people. And all of them have been just very gracious partners that we have at these churches. So we're very thankful that they're back online. We are consistently checking in with the Department of Corrections and Department of Juvenile Justice about any return to contact visitation and whether it would be modified as certain facilities are okay to be reopened, or would this be a whole system reopening? I do know that it will look different than it looked before for some time, but we don't have a time update, unfortunately.
You know, I think all of us are asking ourselves the question is, how do vaccines factor into this? So, you know, inmates, there's been a big push to make sure that inmates are in one of the first groups to get vaccinated. They live in a communal situation just like nursing homes. And so getting every prisoner vaccinated is important. But people visiting, you know, or traveling by an airplane, you know, will we present our card that says, look, I've been vaccinated and this is the evidence, or will there be a QR code on our phone? I think a lot of us are just asking, how are we going to move through the world post-pandemic and post-vaccination even, so that we're mitigating risk? And I know you don't know what that looks like, and I don't either. And I'm sure the Department of Corrections doesn't either, because there's been no kind of protocol, nothing coming out saying it's going to be like a health passport, you know, and you'll show your vaccination record, and then people will know that, you know, you're safe to go in.
And at the state level, I do know that all offenders have been offered the vaccine, but not all have chosen to take it. And so, you know, therein, if something is reintroduced, you know, then there's a larger problem again. So I know that they're studying it from every angle, and that I'll stay on top of them about letting us know, because, you know, we've got some moms and dads and some spouses that are very anxious to get in and see their loved ones.
So this leaves you, so with limitations on in-person, limitations on visitation centers, so the 15,000 calls a month you're doing is basically people who have personal devices. So explain how you're trying to support those people, and, you know, and do outreach so that everybody who wants to do visitation has an opportunity.
Well, you know, really was educating the inmate population and the facility staff about this coming online and becoming available, getting the education onto DOC's website and the information on ours as well. There's still there's still families without technology that use the visitor centers. There are still families that even have did they have technology, would not necessarily be literate in using it. And then there are also still populations within the Department of Corrections policies for video visitation that can't have the at-home visits. And so those folks then can be served by coming to one of the visitor centers. So our hope moving forward is that we're going to keep reinvesting into that infrastructure and expansion of video visitation technology within the facilities so that more offenders have more access to it. We already added an additional 20 units just this holiday season and into this year in order to meet demand at some of the facilities, and we will plan to continue doing that. We are also going to establish additional visitor centers around the state. We've identified some areas that we're excited about serving because they really are quite a distance and remote for families then to travel. And also seeing what we can do to continue subsidizing and or lowering the cost to families across the board.
So when you move into a new area, are you looking for collaborative partners? How do you do your kind of site selection as far as location? I mean, are you looking particularly for churches or faith communities or other organizations that can host you? How does that look when you try to expand?
It has been since I'm here and also Presbyterian. It started as a network with the minister here. And so we're at Old Presbyterian Meeting House in Alexandria, First Presbyterian Church in Norfolk, Second Presbyterian Church in Roanoke. And then we have some really great supporters and volunteers that we've had for years with our meal groups from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so in Fredericksburg and Petersburg, those are SDA churches that we're working with. You know, in my mind, and because when video visitation was a thing and we were thinking about it, all of us together, DOC initially thought that probation and parole offices might be a good place because there's one in these districts and that, you know, everyone's got one. And so it was tried as a model at first, but I think that families really feel more comfortable coming to a place where they feel welcome, and you know our space is cozy and homey and not institutional, so we're trying to provide a good quality supportive visit the whole time, but we are not, you know, I would definitely love if a like-minded organization were a site. It does not have to be, you know, a faith-based place.
Right. I mean, you've just used the network that you have, which is
Yeah.
how most organizations grow, is like you just use
Yeah.
what you have and it comes to
please.
you. Yeah. So by elevating this, by doing this show and by getting this out there, I hope organizations will say, well, we would love to help you, because it will help you expand faster if you've got volunteers on the ground in a location, as you said, that is open, welcoming, warm, and can provide all the things that these families need when they go to a visitation center. So if you had a magic wand, and let's say it's not a magic wand, let's just say it's a lot of money, and you know you could take a lot of money and invest it in something, what do you see are your priorities? You know, if funds were not an issue, what would you do?
I would share our children's program and expand it. I think it's just so important as an intervention and prevention tool, and really also further enhance the parent and caregiver portion of that. I would establish statewide transportation to institutions, be it regionally or some just larger scale system. We had just expanded to a Norfolk arm before COVID hit, and I was super excited about that. So I'd like to be able to serve all over the state and get families to the institutions for contact visitation. Continue to educate the community and others about this highly marginalized population that's not often considered, but definitely our collateral damage when it comes to some of what has happened in their family, and that using evidence-based work really boost our community and lowers our recidivism rates.
You know, one of the things, because I work with Friends of Guest House, which is a reentry program in Alexandria that works with women who were formerly incarcerated, and the numbers of women incarcerated has risen exponentially since the 70s. And many of them are housed in facilities that were never built for women. So all around the Commonwealth of Virginia, women are housed in facilities that were built for men, or they're in, you know, some regional jails, you know, have both men and women in the same facility. It's a nightmarish, really. Um, and so we can't really talk about the impact on children and families without talking about the exponential growth in the number of women with children who have been incarcerated in the last 40 years. And the fact that it does have this adverse childhood experience for young people, which is why there is such a generational cycle of kids who are traumatized, who then become part of the system. And then it just goes, you know, it just continues generation after generation. How do people find your program? Like, how do families find you, or how do people on the inside find you? I mean, so that you can connect the dots, so that you can bring people together. How does that work?
Well, it's very fortunate opportunities like the one I'm having right now. We are also listed in prisoner assistance directories nationwide. And so weekly we receive letters from inmates and families across the nation. And what we can't help with directly here in Virginia, if they're in Nevada or California, we do our best to make sure that they are aligned with resources in their own state. We inmate word of mouth is one of our largest commercials. So we try to work as closely with DOC as we can, and also DJJ, to make sure that their populations are aware of our services. Community members, the families that come and ride, often if they are aware that someone has come into the system, they will share that information with families too, and making sure that we have exposure on the public websites of our partnering organizations. Um, that's really
Yeah. But you know, so the numbers are staggering. I mentioned earlier in the show that there are 40 correctional facilities, and I was hoping I would not be quizzed on them, because I couldn't. I mean, I know a few of the big major ones, Wallens Ridge or Red Onion, you know, but I don't know. I couldn't name 40 correctional facilities in the Commonwealth of Virginia that you serve, or that are served by video visitation. And so talk a little bit about juvenile detention, and how you interact as far as trying to bring these services to juvenile facilities.
Several years ago, we launched, in cooperation with DJJ, a transportation program. So, as in the past several years, DJJ has done an amazing and incredible job at population reduction by getting kids back into community that don't need to be in a residential setting. And so the remaining state facility at this time is Bon Air, which is here in Richmond. But children that are there are from all over the state. And so it was a mirror of what we do with the adult system. For DJJ, we go to the outlying court service units, pick up the families, bring them into Bon Air 2 Sundays a month for visitation, and then get them back home. And that's a free service for families. So that the response to that was incredible, because you are seeing mothers that haven't seen their children in several years because they could not get here, and just a really emotional experience that also prompted them then to have a family day, which they had not had in several years, and was one of the most moving events I've ever attended, to see everyone interacting as you would with your family.
That is amazing. And again, something a lot of us don't necessarily think about if we have not been directly impacted by having somebody in our family incarcerated. But the great distances in Virginia that people have to travel. And again, so much of why people are incarcerated, and I'll just go back to women who are incarcerated, you know, some of it stems from addiction and poverty. You know, and so it's kind of like, so why are there so many more women? There are reasons that women are in prison, and there are reasons that so many of them have children, but this is tearing families apart. And what you're trying to do, what AFOI is trying to do, is to keep families together, because ultimately when people have served their time, whether they're juvenile or they're an adult, they have to reintegrate back into a community, and that community should be centered around their family. You know, and I'm preaching to the choir here. You should be preaching this, but yeah, you know, it's kind of like, how can you go back to a family you haven't talked to or seen in 8 years?
Yes, and we serve on the Richmond Regional Reentry Council, and there's so many issues around this and reentry that are very important: housing, employment, transportation. But of course, our standpoint is that family is first. And it doesn't matter how you define family, who that might be to you. But if you don't have someone to get you to your probation appointments, if you don't have someone that's willing to house you when you first come out, if you don't have someone that's willing to get you to a job interview, so maintaining these supportive connections throughout the period of incarceration are critical for all involved. And they lead to more successful family reintegration, thereby leading to lower recidivism rates. People are going to do better, but they have to have support. And what we want to do is let the supporters, the folks that are having to give and give and give of the support, know that they have ours. Too often, families themselves will go into debt just maintaining this relationship. And we've got families that travel from out of the country, fly into Richmond, take a taxi from the airport down here to downtown. I mean, it is amazing the lengths that loved ones will go to maintain that connection. It's critical.
And we as a community should support that. I mean, mass incarceration is a problem. Institutional racism in the Commonwealth of Virginia is a problem, and you can see that in the numbers and in the data. This is not just look at the disproportionate number of Black and brown people who are in our jails and prisons versus their representation in our overall population. And we have got to combat poverty issues, addiction issues, racism issues, educational issues. You know, we have to have an economy where everybody can make a living wage and live on what they earn when they work a full-time job. And so there's so many different levers and so many things that have to come together to solve the underlying problems of why so many people are incarcerated in this country, and particularly in Virginia. But in that interim, what you're doing is you have this unbroken thread of trying to keep the person on the inside connected with the person on the outside so that bond remains strong. You know, it's damaging enough to have a family member incarcerated. It's damaging enough to find yourself incarcerated and everything that means. But the most benefit that people can have is to know that somebody cares. And so tell me a little bit about, after having done this 20 years and AFOI being around for 43 years, you must have some really solid relationships, especially with families who have relied on you when their loved ones are in there for a very long time.
Yeah, we, it really is a community. I come and work the buses on Saturday mornings, and it really is a community. And folks have been riding with us. I know at least some of them since our database was created in 1995. We were at paper applications before that, and so there's still folks riding with us today. When you see a low number, you know that's been a long time. But they are dedicated to going and visiting, and they are dedicated to the same milestone events, that I am with my family, and they celebrate birthdays and do what they can. I think what you see is just resiliency and hope. This is a heart science. It's not difficult to understand. We all should be paying attention to it. In the state of Virginia, there are 24,000 individuals in the Department of Corrections right now, with another 4,800 folks holding in local and regional jails awaiting transfer into DOC, and they can't right now due to COVID. But 95% of those people are going to be reentering our community at some point. And if we just take them and isolate them and don't give them access to a support system, how successful do we believe that will be when that 95% comes home?
You know, you say 24,000 are connected with the DOC, that is the population of Fairfax City where I live.
Mm.
That's everybody who lives in the city where I live, 24,000. So wrap your mind around that. If you come into my city and you look around and say, this entire population represents the number of people incarcerated just in the Department of Corrections prison systems, not even the jails
Right.
and the other facilities. And we should care about that because they are going to come back into our communities. And it seems to me, and I think you were the one who mentioned this in a previous conversation we had, we need to set people up for success. And I think you're the one who said we should set them up for success at sentencing. You
Yeah,
know?
I do. I attended a conference, and that's where I learned this, and that is that reentry really should start at the time of sentencing, and it should involve family all the way through. When I graduated from VCU, I was hired as a probation officer for Chesterfield County Community Corrections with adults, and noticed a disparity or a separation between the folks that I was working with and their family involvement. And so I think that, families need to be informed and communicated with and involved in this process as you start with the expectation of coming home and being successful. And they've got a critical role in a lot of this, as I've said, because it's generally falling on them to fund commissary and connections, and then housing, and getting to appointments and that kind of thing. So it's critical.
And again, the talking about the children and not knowing who in a particular classroom has a parent who's incarcerated, whether that's a detention facility or, as you pointed out, in an ICE facility waiting to be deported, it causes stress not only on that child, but in that classroom and in those school communities too, for teachers not to have a handle on exactly how much trauma is pervasive in their school community.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that we talk about this easily. And I think children get mixed messages and mixed signals about what they can and cannot share, or when to ask for help, or how to ask for help, or what help they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to think about that too as a community. All of us need to care about every member of that family who's been touched by incarceration. So I want to again suggest people go to your website. It's rich with resources. People can fill out a form if they want to, apply to visit back when it's open again.
Mm-hmm.
But an intake form, your intake form is online. You do consultations, which I think is great because your program is a proven model. It's a best practices. You do presentations. You can speak to groups or on panels, which I think is terrific. You can do trainings. So, people should reach out if they are interested in supporting your organization, or simply want to find out how they can incorporate what you're doing where they are. So
Mm-hmm.
what might that look like?
Well, a host of things. We've got at each of our church sites, we've got opportunities for further volunteerism. And of course, as we've discussed, the potential of establishing sites in the state. And I'd love to see a broad network of visitor community sites. And then we've got direct volunteer opportunities always around the holidays, school supply drive. We've got an Amazon wish list. Board of directors opportunities as well if you want to get further involved, and if not even serving on the board, on some of our committees. So a host of things, and we appreciate this opportunity and the opportunity to share about how others can help, because we truly rely on our volunteers to help us achieve our mission.
Well, you've done an amazing amount of work with a very small staff and a lot of volunteers and a lot of, Presbyterian churches, Adventist churches. And, and I hope what people walk away with from this interview is that this is just another component of healthy communities.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about all the aspects of healthy communities, and we can talk about social determinants of health, which has gotten to be a very popular thing to talk about as far as people's actual physical health, mental health, and longevity.
Mm-hmm.
But incarceration factors into all of this. And when we don't consider the impact on families dealing with incarceration, then we're just really turning a blind eye to something that is tremendously impacting our communities, and we're kind of choosing to be blind to it.
Right.
And so it's out there, and we don't have to look very far to find it. In fact, I found you through John Horsch of SALT. Give a shout out to John and the work of SALT.
Absolutely.
I tell you, that man's been doing it since '83, and he's relentless. And I love that about
Amazing.
John.
Yeah.
And so he was very excited about the fact that there was a budget amendment this year in the legislature. You are getting some funds to further the work that you're doing, but there just needs to be greater awareness and a greater buy-in from people all over the Commonwealth of Virginia. Not just the people in Richmond. We've got people impacted all over. And again, this impacts communities everywhere. And I think we want Virginia to be a place where everyone thrives and is successful. And that includes people who have paid their debt to society through their incarceration. So parting words for us, what do you want us to remember here in the last 2 minutes of the show, Fran, about, what you hope to do? I mean, besides the fact we'd like to eradicate the numbers of those incarcerated, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I want a thriving and vibrant community and a thriving and vibrant Virginia. And, we have the lowest recidivism rate of all states in the country right now. And I think to keep this needle of progress moving is to continue paying attention to parts of these issues that haven't necessarily been recognized before. And we definitely fall in that category. And I'm excited that we are getting more attention than I've seen, and that more folks are paying attention to these issues overall, because like I said, it's a lot of people are going to be coming home, and if we want success there, then some of these things start now in schools and in homes, and then continue and become the responsibility of all of us to make sure that connections are positive and supportive and present.
And I think that's something that people can take away from this and know how we rely on the support of our own families. We rely on the support of our own communities, whether that's our faith community or our neighborhoods or our work community. And this should be afforded to everyone in the Commonwealth of Virginia, whether they have paid a price and done their time. They should be afforded these avenues to success, and certainly their families and their children should be afforded an avenue to success. So I want to thank you, Fran, so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to send everybody to afoi.org to find out how you can help. And there are numerous ways that you can help. And to think about or ask in your own local community whether there's someone doing this work or offering support to families who have members who are incarcerated in our corrective system. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been Inside Scoop here on Fairfax Public Access.